close your right nostril. Just press your thumb against it and seal it off. Now breathe in through the left. Slowly. Hold it for a count of 3. Exhale. Do it twice more. 3 breaths. That is all. Now here is what I want you to notice. Something shifted. You cannot point to it exactly. Your pulse did not jump. Your vision did not change. But something inside your chest, and I mean inside, at a level you have no conscious access to, has already begun to rearrange itself. And you produce that rearrangement by selecting which hole in your face the air went through. That ought to bother you. It ought to strike you as very strange, because it means the 2 sides of your nose are not doing the same job. And if you are anything like most people, you have gone your entire life assuming they were identical, just 2 tunnels running in parallel, carrying air to the same place. Symmetric, redundant, nothing interesting going on. That assumption is completely wrong. And the reason it is wrong takes us into some of the most beautiful asymmetric engineering in the human body. Let me show you what is actually in there. Your nasal cavity is not one open tube. It is 2 separate chambers, divided by a wall of cartilage and bone called the nasal septum. And inside each chamber, projecting inward from the side wall, there are 3 curved bony shelves. They are called turbinates, the inferior, the middle, and the superior. They are shaped like scrolls, these long curving ridges that stick out into the airstream, and their job is to increase surface area. The air hits them, swirls around them, gets warmed, gets humidified, gets filtered. The inferior turbinate is the largest one. It sits right in the main path of the incoming air, low in the passage, and it is covered in a thick mucous membrane. Now here is the part nobody tells you. That membrane is wrapped around a core of erectile tissue. I know. The same kind of tissue, the same category, structurally, that engorges with blood in the genitals. Large, thin-walled veins called venous sinusoids, packed together, capable of filling rapidly with blood and swelling the turbinate until it nearly blocks the airway on that side. Or draining, shrinking the whole structure down, opening the passage wide. The inferior turbinate alone can change its volume enough to reduce airflow on one side by 70 to 80%. And it does this all day long, alternating. One side swells up while the other side opens. Then they switch, back and forth, on a cycle that runs about every 2.5 hours on average, though it varies. Sometimes 40 minutes, sometimes 8 hours, depending on your age, your posture, whether you are asleep or awake. You have never noticed this. Almost nobody does. And the reason you have never noticed it is elegant. The total airflow through both nostrils combined stays roughly constant. As one side closes, the other opens by an equal amount. So your subjective experience of breathing does not change, even though the internal architecture of your airway is in continuous motion underneath. You think you are breathing through your nose. You are actually breathing through half your nose, and which half changes while you are not paying attention. There is a further subtlety. The congested side, with its slow trickle of air, gives odor molecules more time to bind with the olfactory receptors high in the nasal cavity. The open side, with fast airflow, captures volatile compounds that bind quickly. Together, the 2 sides detect a broader range of smells than either could alone. You are not breathing with one nose. You are breathing with 2 noses that take turns, and each turn optimizes for a different set of tasks, one for airflow and fast-binding odorants, the other for mucosal recovery and slow-binding odorants. The engineering is extraordinarily economical. A German physician named Richard Kayser first documented this in 1895. He was examining patients and noticed one side congested, the other clear. Come back in 2 hours, the pattern is reversed. He called it the nasal cycle. In 1927, Heatdirks measured it systematically and found it in 80% of a healthy population. And here is the key. The resting side, the congested side, is not broken. It is recovering. See, if you had one passage open all the time, with a constant stream of dry air blasting through it, You would desiccate the mucosal lining, damage the cilia that sweep out debris, and compromise the immune defenses sitting in that epithelium. The cycle ensures that one side is always moist, always regenerating, while the other handles the airflow. It is a maintenance rotation. Your body runs it automatically on a timer you never set, controlled by the hypothalamus, that little 4-gram structure buried at the base of your brain. Now you might say, fine, that is interesting engineering, but what does it have to do with the left nostril being different from the right? Why should it matter which side is currently open? Here is where it gets really good. Because the hypothalamus does not just alternate the turbinates, it alternates the entire autonomic nervous system along with them. The nasal cycle is not an isolated nasal event. It is the nasal expression of a whole body oscillation. And that changes everything. The autonomic nervous system has 2 branches. You know this probably. The sympathetic branch, that is your fight or flight system. It speeds up the heart, constricts blood vessels, diverts blood to the muscles, dumps glucose into the bloodstream, suppresses digestion. It is the machinery of mobilization. When a bear is chasing you, or you think a bear is chasing you, or you are lying in bed at 2 in the morning worrying about something that is functionally equivalent to a bear, that is sympathetic activation. The parasympathetic branch is the opposite. It slows the heart, dilates the visceral blood vessels, promotes digestion, stimulates glandular secretion. It is the machinery of recovery. Rest and repair. Now here is what Kayser did not know, and what took another 90 years to figure out. When the right nostril is open, when sympathetic fibers have constricted the right turbinate and drained the blood out of it, that sympathetic activation is not limited to the nose. It is a systemic state. The whole body shifts towards sympathetic dominance. Heart rate tends to be a little higher. Skin conductance changes. Metabolic rate ticks up. When the left nostril is open, when parasympathetic fibers have dilated the left turbinate and the right side is congested, the whole body shifts toward parasympathetic dominance. Heart rate tends to be lower. The body shifts into conservation mode. This is not something I am extrapolating from theory. It is not a matter of saying, well, the sympathetic system controls the turbinate, and the sympathetic system also controls the heart, so they are probably linked. That kind of reasoning is suggestive, but it is not evidence. Evidence is when you measure both things simultaneously and show they move together. In 1986, Kennedy, Ziegler, and Shanahoff-Kalsa at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in La Jolla did exactly that. They drew blood simultaneously from both arms of resting subjects while monitoring which nostril was dominant. They measured plasma catecholamines, adrenaline and noradrenaline, the chemical markers of sympathetic activation, and found that the concentrations alternated between the 2 sides of the body in tight synchrony with the nasal cycle. The hormonal asymmetry was literally lateralized, rising on one side, falling on the other, tracking the nose. The nose is not causing this oscillation. The nose is a surface readout of a deeper rhythm, but, and this is the critical point, you can reach in and override the rhythm. You can force it. When you close one nostril with your thumb and breathe through the other, you are not just redirecting air. You are intervening in the autonomic oscillation. You are telling the hypothalamus, run this side now. Deborah Wernz, Reginald Bickford, and David Shanahoff-Kalsa at the University of California, San Diego published what I consider the pivotal study on this in 1983 in the journal Human Neurobiology. They placed EEG electrodes on both hemispheres of the brain and simultaneously monitored nasal airflow with thermistors in each nostril. 43 resting, healthy adults. 19 produced clean enough EEG records for analysis. Every single one showed the same thing. Greater airflow through one nostril correlated with greater EEG amplitude in the contralateral hemisphere. Left nostril dominant, the right hemisphere lights up. Right nostril dominant, the left hemisphere lights up. The correlation was consistent across all subjects and across all frequency bands. Now that by itself is interesting. But in 1987 they went further. They showed that forced unilateral breathing, deliberately choosing one nostril, could shift the hemispheric dominance in the predicted direction. The nose was not just reading the brain state, it was writing to it. And the mechanism is beautifully specific. It appears to involve sensory neurons in the superior nasal meatus, the uppermost passage inside the nasal cavity. Air flowing across this region activates nerve endings that project directly to the brainstem. When they anesthetized the nasal mucosa locally, the cortical effects disappeared. When they insufflated air into the upper nasal cavity without inflating the lungs, just blowing air across the mucosa, no actual breathing, the cortical effect still appeared. The signal is nasal, not pulmonary. It is the airflow across the tissue itself that carries the information. Now you know that the right hemisphere is associated more with spatial processing, pattern recognition, holistic thinking. The left hemisphere is associated more with verbal processing, sequential logic, analytical reasoning. When Shanahoff-Khalsa tested 51 right-handed undergraduates on cognitive tasks during 30 minutes of forced unilateral breathing, spatial performance, mental rotation, the kind of three-dimensional reasoning you use in engineering and navigation was significantly enhanced during left nostril breathing. Published in the International Journal of Neuroscience, 1993. P-value of 0.028. Left nostril opens the right hemisphere does spatial reasoning. The nose is a switch, not a metaphorical switch. A measured, repeatable, EEG-verified functional switch that you can flip with your thumb. But here is where I want you to follow carefully, because the mechanism does not stop at cognition. That would already be enough, a physical switch in your nose that alters which hemisphere of your brain is more active. That alone would be worth knowing about. But there is more. The same asymmetric neural signal that is shifting hemisphere dominance is simultaneously acting on a set of structures you cannot see and cannot feel, bone-enclosed chambers buried behind your face, that are producing a gas. And your body is using that gas the way a hospital uses a drug that costs more than $100 an hour. In 1995, John Lundberg, together with Eddie Weitzberg and colleagues at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, published a discovery in Nature Medicine that rearranged the whole picture of nasal physiology. They had been measuring nitric oxide, NO, a colorless, odorless gas that the body uses as a signaling molecule, in exhaled breath. They expected it to come from the lungs, and some of it does, but the majority of it does not come from the lungs at all. It comes from the paranasal sinuses. Now let me describe the architecture, because it matters. Your skull contains 4 pairs of air-filled cavities. The maxillary sinuses, those are behind your cheekbones, the biggest ones. The frontal sinuses, above your eyebrows. The ethmoid sinuses, between your eyes. And the sphenoid sinuses, deep behind the ethmoid, almost at the geometric center of your head. Put your finger between your eyes. The ethmoid sinuses are right there, behind the bone. And behind them, deeper still, the sphenoids. These cavities are lined with epithelial cells that express a nitric oxide synthase enzyme. Now, typically, inducible nitric oxide synthase, the kind associated with immune response, has to be switched on by inflammation. It requires a trigger, an infection, an injury, a cytokine signal. But Lundberg found something different in the sinuses. The enzyme expressed there is a hybrid. It most closely resembles the inducible form, but it is constitutively active, meaning it runs all the time, whether you are sick or healthy, without needing any trigger whatsoever. It is calcium independent. It is steroid resistant. It just sits there in the sinus epithelium and produces nitric oxide continuously, at concentrations 1 to 2 orders of magnitude higher than anywhere else in the respiratory tract. Your paranasal sinuses are gas factories. They are manufacturing a vasodilator, an antimicrobial agent, and a signaling molecule 24 hours a day, storing it in these bone-enclosed chambers like pressurized reservoirs. And every time you inhale through your nose, negative pressure pulls that gas out of the sinus cavities through the ostia, the small drainage openings, some no wider than a few millimeters, and carries it down into the trachea and lungs with the incoming air. Here is what happens when it arrives. The nitric oxide diffuses across the alveolar membrane and activates an enzyme called soluble guanylate cyclase in the smooth muscle cells lining the pulmonary arteries. This enzyme converts guanosine triphosphate to cyclic guanosine monophosphate, cyclic GMP, a second messenger that causes the smooth muscle to relax. The arteries dilate. Blood flow to the alveoli increases. The ventilation perfusion ratio improves. Oxygen transfer becomes more efficient. Lundberg and his team measured this directly. Nasal breathing produced higher transcutaneous oxygen tension than oral breathing. Consistent, measurable, and requiring no effort on the part of the breather. You breathe through your nose. Nitric oxide enters your lungs. Your pulmonary arteries open a bit wider. More oxygen gets into your blood. And the gas does more than vasodilate. At the concentrations found in healthy sinuses, nitric oxide directly inhibits the replication of bacteria and viruses on mucosal surfaces. It disrupts bacterial respiration. It damages viral coat proteins. Lundberg and Weitzberg proposed that one of the primary functions of sinus nitric oxide is to maintain sterility in these enclosed bone cavities, cavities that would otherwise be perfect warm, moist incubators for infection. The sinuses have no other obvious sterilization mechanism, no ciliary clearance to speak of, no constant airflow flushing them out. They rely on this gas. It is their immune system. And there is a further implication that connects the nose to the lungs in a way nobody expected before 1995. Lundberg's group at the Karolinska proposed that nitric oxide, produced in the upper airways, may act in what they called an Aerocrine fashion. The gas is produced in one anatomical location, carried by the airstream to a distant site, and acts there as a physiological messenger. It is not endocrine, which is hormones in the blood. It is not paracrine, which is local cell-to-cell signaling. It is aerocrine, through the air, from the sinuses to the lungs, with every breath. Now think about the nasal cycle in this context. When one side is congested, turbinate swollen, airflow reduced, less air passes through, less negative pressure at the ostia, less nitric oxide gets pulled out. The gas accumulates inside the sinus. When the cycle reverses and that side opens up, the rush of air through the newly clear passage draws a concentrated pulse of accumulated nitric oxide into the airstream. The nasal cycle is not just alternating airflow, it is alternating nitric oxide delivery. Each shift of the cycle generates a pulse of vasodilator gas to the lungs. The sinuses produce it, the turbinates gate it, the breath delivers it, and the whole system runs without any conscious participation from you. But here is the thing that connects all of this back to the left nostril. The parasympathetic activation associated with left nostril dominance is not just slowing your heart, it is also acting on the cardiovascular system through this second overlapping pathway. And the evidence for the cardiovascular effects, well, let me tell you what has been measured. Left nostril breathing enhances parasympathetic tone. Parasympathetic tone decelerates the heart. And a slower heart rate, sustained over minutes, increases heart rate variability, the beat-to-beat fluctuation in the intervals between successive heartbeats. Now, heart rate variability is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is right. A heart with high variability is responding dynamically to real-time autonomic input, speeding slightly on inhalation, slowing slightly on exhalation, adjusting continuously to posture, emotion, metabolic demand. A heart with low variability is stuck in one mode, and low heart rate variability is now recognized as an independent risk factor for cardiovascular mortality. Pal, Velkumari, and Madan Mohan at the Jawaharlal Institute of Postgraduate Medical Education and Research in India studied 85 volunteers divided into 3 groups: right nostril breathers, left nostril breathers, and controls. After 6 weeks of daily practice, the left nostril group showed a significant decrease in the low frequency to high frequency ratio of heart rate variability. The parasympathetic component went up. The sympathetic component came down. Blood pressure, both systolic and diastolic, declined. Rate pressure product, heart rate multiplied by systolic pressure, a clinical index of myocardial oxygen demand, decreased. The heart was doing less work per beat. The vascular resistance was lower. In the right nostril group, the pattern went the other direction. Sympathetic markers increased. Heart rate went up. Same nose. Different side. Opposite cardiovascular outcome. A separate study tested 60 healthy men on a treadmill. After exercise, the group that recovered while breathing only through the left nostril returned to baseline heart rate and blood pressure significantly faster than the group breathing normally. The parasympathetic rebound was accelerated by restricting airflow to the left side. Now let me paint a picture. There is a woman, 68 years old, retired school teacher, takes a walk every morning, comes home breathing hard, sits on the front steps waiting for the heart to settle, blood pressure medication in the cabinet. Her doctor says manage stress. She tried a meditation app. Irritating. She tried the deep breathing pattern, 4 counts in, 7 counts hold, 8 counts out, and she loses track by the 3rd cycle and feels like she is failing at relaxation, which is a uniquely modern absurdity. She does not need a pattern. She does not need an app. She needs to close one nostril. The effect is modest. I want to be clear about that. It is not replacing her antihypertensive. But it is measurable, it is reproducible, and it operates through a defined physiological pathway that was first observed more than a century ago when one side of a patient's nose was swollen and the other was clear, and a German physician thought that was curious enough to write down. Now, I owe you an honest reckoning of the evidence, because this is science, and science is not a collection of enthusiasms. It is not a set of things you would like to be true arranged in an appealing order. It is a method for sorting through what we think we know and assigning each piece the confidence it actually deserves. And I take that obligation seriously, because the moment you oversell a finding, you have stopped doing science and started doing advertising. The nasal cycle itself, the alternating congestion and decongestion of the turbinates, is about as well established as any phenomenon in otolaryngology. Measured by rhinoflowmetry over 24-hour periods, confirmed by computed tomography and magnetic resonance imaging, replicated across thousands of subjects over 130 years. The anatomy is settled. The hypothalamic control is documented through both physiological studies and clinical observations in patients with autonomic dysfunction. There is no serious dispute about the existence or the mechanism of the nasal cycle. The autonomic lateralization, that left nostril dominance correlates with parasympathetic tone and right with sympathetic, is supported by multiple independent lines of evidence. The catecholamine study from Kennedy and colleagues. The heart rate effects measured by Shanahoff-Kulsa using impedance cardiography. The heart rate variability data from several groups. These converge. The cerebral hemisphere shifting is where you should hold the evidence with a slightly lighter grip. The Wernst study had 19 clean EEG records. Shanahoff-Kulsa's cognitive study used 51 subjects. The spatial cognition enhancement reached significance. But a 2022 study in Scientific Reports by Niazi and colleagues at Auckland University of Technology, 30 subjects, more sophisticated EEG analysis, confirmed general cortical changes during unilateral breathing, but found the contralateral hemisphere specificity was not equally clean across all frequency bands. The direction is consistent. The precision is still being refined. The nitric oxide pathway is solid at the biochemical level. Lundberg and Weitzberg's discovery has been confirmed and extended by dozens of studies. The sinuses produce the gas constitutively. Nasal breathing delivers it to the lungs. The vasodilatory effect is measured. What remains uncertain is the degree to which the nasal cycle specifically modulates that delivery in a way that matters clinically across different people. The cardiovascular effects of sustained left nostril breathing, reduced blood pressure, improved heart rate variability have been shown in controlled studies. Most used young, healthy volunteers. The translation to older adults with established heart disease or to patients already on beta blockers or ACE inhibitors has not been tested in the kind of large randomized trial that would change clinical guidelines. So calibrate accordingly. The anatomy and the autonomic link are settled science. The hemisphere effects are directionally reliable, but still being quantified precisely. The cardiovascular applications are promising, physiologically coherent, and not yet proven to the standard that would warrant a prescription. But now, I want you to hold both things in your head at once. The nitric oxide your sinuses produce, and the nitric oxide that hospitals deliver as a drug. Because they are the same molecule acting through the same pathway. In neonatal intensive care units and cardiac ICUs, inhaled nitric oxide is administered to patients with pulmonary hypertension, dangerous constriction of the arteries inside the lungs. The gas is metered from a pressurized cylinder, mixed with oxygen at a precise ratio, and delivered through mechanical ventilation at concentrations between 5 and 20 parts per million. The mechanism of action is identical. The molecule activates soluble guanylate cyclase. Cyclic GMP is produced. The smooth muscle relaxes. The pulmonary arteries dilate. Same molecule, same enzyme, same second messenger, same vascular response. The cost of hospital-administered inhaled nitric oxide, documented across multiple institutional analyses, runs between $125 and $150 per hour in the United States. A typical treatment course for a neonate with persistent pulmonary hypertension spans 60 to 96 hours. Total cost per patient can reach $12,000 or more. Some adult cardiac patients have required treatments costing over $300,000 per year at a single institution. Your paranasal sinuses produce the same molecule, continuously, at sinus concentrations that reach parts per million, the same order of magnitude used therapeutically, for free. Now, I am not going to be dishonest with you. That hospital intervention saves lives. It is used in critically ill patients whose lungs are in acute crisis. The concentrations are precisely controlled and sustained at therapeutic levels for days. The nitric oxide your sinuses produce reaches the lungs in lower pulsatile doses that fluctuate with the nasal cycle. You cannot replace an ICU intervention by closing one nostril with your thumb. But the molecular pathway is not a metaphor. It is not analogous. It is the same cascade. The pharmaceutical intervention isolates, concentrates, and delivers what your body is already producing with every nasal inhalation. And the evidence from Lundberg and Weitzberg, measured, published, replicated, shows that nasal breathing measurably improves arterial oxygenation compared to oral breathing. The natural dose, delivered over a lifetime of nasal breathing, contributes to baseline pulmonary vascular function. Every chronic mouth breather is bypassing this delivery system. Every person who sleeps with their mouth open spends 7 to 8 hours per night with zero sinus-derived nitric oxide reaching the pulmonary vasculature. The pharmaceutical version costs $150 an hour and requires a pressurized cylinder, a flow meter, and an ICU bed. The anatomical version requires a closed mouth and an open nose. And you know what is really something? The pharmaceutical industry did not discover nitric oxide and then find out the body makes it. The sequence was the other way around. Researchers discovered that the body produces nitric oxide endogenously. Robert Furchtgott, Louis Ignarro, and Farid Murad shared the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1998 for that work, and then the pharmaceutical applications followed. The drug is a concentrated copy of what your sinuses have been manufacturing since the day you were born. The body had the patent first, by several 100 million years. There is one more piece, and it closes the whole loop. The mucous membrane lining your nasal cavity is innervated by branches of the trigeminal nerve, the fifth cranial nerve, the largest in the skull. When air flows across that mucosa, pressure-sensitive and temperature-sensitive receptors fire. The signals travel to the spinal trigeminal nucleus in the brainstem, a structure that sits right next to the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus nerve. The vagus is the main parasympathetic highway to the heart, the lungs, the gut. And the trigeminal vagal anatomical proximity is not accidental. There is a documented reflex pathway connecting nasal airflow to vagal output. Stimulation of the upper nasal mucosa feeds into brainstem circuits that modulate parasympathetic tone. So when you breathe slowly through the left nostril, three things happen at once. The lateralized autonomic rhythm shifts toward parasympathetic dominance through the hypothalamic oscillation. The trigeminal vagal reflex receives gentle rhythmic stimulation from airflow across the upper mucosa. And sinus-derived nitric oxide enters the lungs, dilating the pulmonary vasculature and improving oxygen transfer. The person who lies awake at 2 a.m. with a racing heart, sympathetic overdrive, cortisol flooding, peripheral vasoconstriction, the whole fight-or-flight architecture running against a threat that does not exist in the room, that person is not being irrational. The nervous system does not distinguish between a predator and a mortgage payment. It responds to perceived threat with the same ancient machinery. And once that machinery is engaged, it is self-reinforcing. The racing heart makes you aware of the racing heart, which makes it race more. The sympathetic branch drives itself in a loop. That person can roll to the right side, which mechanically compresses the right nostril against the pillow and tends to open the left, and breathe slowly through the left passage. Three systems converge. None of them is dramatic on its own. Together they constitute a multi-system parasympathetic intervention produced by air passing through one side of the nose. Heatdirks noticed the postural effect back in 1927. The turbinates in the nostril closest to the pillow tend to fill when you lie on your side, because gravity and hydrostatic pressure shift blood into the dependent turbinate. Lying on your right side congests the right and opens the left. The ancient yogic recommendation to sleep on the right side after a meal to promote digestion through parasympathetic activation maps onto this postural effect exactly. The body already knows the architecture. It has been using it while you sleep for your entire life. You know, your grandmother or the old family doctor with the worn leather bag never said the words constitutively expressed nitric oxide synthase or lateralized ultradian autonomic oscillation. What they said was much shorter. Breathe through your nose, dear. Slowly. Through the nose. They did not know about the venous sinusoids in the inferior turbinates. They did not know about the hypothalamic timer running the nasal cycle every 2.5 hours. They did not know that Lundberg would find that the paranasal sinuses are manufacturing a vasodilator gas at concentrations approaching the maximum permissible atmospheric pollution level. They did not know that Wernz would strap EEG electrodes to 19 volunteers at UCSD and find that the side of the nose you breathe through determines which hemisphere of your brain shows dominant electrical activity. They knew it worked. They knew it from watching. They knew it from doing it. They did not need to know the mechanism. The mechanism ran whether they understood it or not, just as gravity works whether or not you have read Newton. And the yogic practitioners who codified left nostril breathing as Chandrabadana, moon-piercing breath, more than 1,000 years before Kayser observed the nasal cycle in an 1890s German clinic, they did not use the language of cyclic guanosine monophosphate or soluble guanylate cyclase. They used the language of cooling, of calming, of drawing the mind inward. They were describing the subjective experience of a parasympathetic shift. And they were empirically correct about the direction of the effect and its applications for sleep, for anxiety, for recovery, centuries before the mechanism was measured. That is not mysticism. That is observation. Good observation, carried forward through oral tradition for 1,000 years, waiting for the instrumentation to catch up. Here is what they all figured out, what the grandmother knew, what the yogi practiced, what the German physician observed, what the researchers at UCSD and the Karolinska Institute finally measured. Your nose has two sides. They do not do the same thing, and you can choose which one to use. Close your right nostril, breathe through the left. The calm is not imagined, it is physiology. Now I want to hear from you. When you tried it just now, those 3 breaths through the left nostril at the beginning, what did you actually feel? And where in your body did you feel it first?